We'll go on mute. Bear with me, I gotta find Kelly in the list of attendees here. Hi, Kelly, you now have the floor to screen share.
Great, I will do that right now. Okay, can everyone confirm if they see my screen? Okay, great.
Welcome judges, members of the Canadian Evaluation Society, and all audience members. We are Footprint Consulting, and we are excited to present a proposal for the Gord Downey and Chani Wenjak Foundation today. Bienvenue à tous. Merci d'avoir assisté à notre présentation aujourd'hui. Tout en reconnaissance des besoins bilingues, notre présentation et notre période de questions-réponses seront en anglais. Footprint Consulting would like to acknowledge that we are on the Coast Salish territory of the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam nations, and the traditional lands of the Shoshone-Bannock Nation. The work that we are presenting is taking place on the Oshugan unceded territory and the Sick Nations of the Grand River First Nation Indian Reserve. We want to acknowledge that we are all settlers and immigrants and that we will continuously be learning and listening to reconcile Canada's past and improve the future. Our team, Footprint Consulting, is comprised of 5 public health students, each with diverse background and the ability to apply an equity and gender-based analysis lens to the evaluation.
This slide shows the outline of our work. Next slide, please. DWF's vision is to create a better life for Indigenous people through DWF's strategic priorities of awareness, education, and connection among Canadians. DWF's aim is to develop cultural understanding and to build reconciliation pathways between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. DWF's work is grounded in the core values of people, collaboration, empowering, and quality. DWF achieves its strategic priorities of education, awareness, action, and connection through growing sustainable revenue, amplifying their voice, and knowing and telling their stories through data. Next slide, please. There are 4 programs of the DWF, which are Legacy Schools, Legacy Spaces, Special Events and Outreach, and Youth Ambassadors. The Secret Path graphic novel, CBC documentary, and music written by Gord Downey is a part of all programs. DWF incorporates reconciliation in all of its work. Next slide, please. DWF hopes to share the story of how their activities have contributed to positive impacts on the lives of Indigenous people in Canada by developing capacity to use and access data to tell the stories of DWF's impact, supporting partners in understanding their impact and how it relates to the local and national work DWF does, and using data in a knowledgeable way to understand, report on, and influence DWF's work going forward.
So here we have a logic model. So after we identified the overarching goal of DWF, we created this, which is a visual demonstration of how proposed causal links between the resources, inputs, and activities will impact the overall outcomes of DWF's programs. It'll also help us and our stakeholders in shaping and setting some priorities and support program monitoring, which will help us ensure that the program stays on track and help us in identifying areas for adjustment. And through the logic model, we've also identified some assumptions, risks, and external factors that will influence the program success. It looks a little busy here, but I'll be providing a more closer look into each component in the next few slides. So our inputs are resources that that DWF has invested into the program. And because this program is very expansive and extends across Canada, we've listed several inputs, some of which include the Educator and Youth Advisory Circle and Council, Indigenous peoples currently involved and not involved in DWF's programs, as well as some students, teachers, volunteers, other staff members, community spaces, as well as funding and digital and print resources. And the activities we kind of align with DWS strategic priorities of education, awareness, and connection. I'll move on to the next part of our logic model, which are our outputs. These are numerical indicators or quantifiers, which will allow us to track the progress and the impact of DWS programs. And some of them include the percentage of Indigenous youth involved, as well as the number of work placements the youth have been involved with, the number of classrooms participating, the number of events held, as well as a number of media interactions that have arose. In terms of outcomes, we've also separated these off into 3 different sections, which include our short-term goals of increased knowledge of Canada's residential schools, as well as Indigenous history, increased culturally safe conversations and spaces, more reciprocal partnerships, and more equitable workplaces for Indigenous peoples. And our long-term or our intermediate outcomes we've identified to be as increased action towards further reconciliation, more championing of DWF's work, increased community connectedness and empowerment, as well as additional funders and more leveraging of Indigenous strengths and storytelling. And this all encompasses in the long-term outcomes of the program's goal of creating a national movement to create a positive change to further cultural understanding and reconciliation. And a continuation of the logic model includes our assumptions and risks and external factors. We are conducting this evaluation with the assumption that programs are still in operation since the beginning of COVID, as well as that the programs honor the outcomes from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions. Some risks we have identified include some avoiding, ensuring that we don't only capture pan-Indigenous perspectives through not disaggregating data and storytelling, as well as a lack of engagement from diverse community groups. And external factors which may influence impact of the evaluation include historical context of colonialism, adapting to the global pandemic, as well as additional community programs that might be already existing and supporting reconciliation.
As with any evaluation, stakeholders, identifying them and engagement is extremely key. So we've identified our primary stakeholders as being the Educator Advisory Circle, the Youth Advisory Council, Indigenous people currently involved in DWF's activities and programs, and the student teachers. Secondary is represented by the volunteers, the staff, organization, and educational institutions participating in the legacy spaces, and DWF's champions. Tertiary is represented by the funders who support DWF's programs, attendees of the special events, and social media supporters. Engagement will be extremely key to ensure that we collect the data we need. So using a teaching and learning method where everyone is a teacher and everyone is a learner, we will start engagement with an informal planning meeting with the Education Advisory Circle. We want the first meeting to be informal to address any power dynamics and to discuss with the Education Advisory Circle who is missing from the circle that needs to be added to ensure that all voices are heard. From there, we will continue to build a respectful and mutually beneficial evaluation model and relationships to create a continuous feedback loop with the advisory circle throughout the entire evaluation process. Collaboration with the Youth Advisory Council will occur in a similar process to ensure that youth's voice are amplified and are part of the evaluation design. We are ensuring that all of our engagement processes are supporting DWF's pathway to amplify voices through the entire evaluation process. So that's represented in who we are identifying as stakeholders and our engagement methods. Next slide, please, Kelly. So our evaluation will be an impact evaluation as DWF is interested in understanding their impact of the lives on Indigenous people across Canada and the reconciliation actions taken by Canadians to further the reconciliation process. We will use an Indigenous evaluation approach known as the 4 Rs: respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility, as this will empower Indigenous ways of working, consider cultural sensitive contexts, support relationship building, and will emphasize the importance of giving space and letting Indigenous people be part of the design and be design process conductors. As participation and consistent feedback from the advisory circle is crucial in our approach, we acknowledge that our proposed ideas may shift after consulting with the advisory circle to ensure that other members and ideas are reflected in our processes. And then lastly, not part of the 4 Rs framework, but starting our reflexivity is we will be practicing reflexivity throughout the entire of our evaluation to examine our own beliefs, our judgments and practices, and how we can learn from them going forward.
We have chosen 4 data collection methods that will support the understanding of how DWF's activities have contributed to positive impacts on the lives of Indigenous peoples in Canada. These data collection methods will facilitate long-term pathways that will define what a positive impact means from an Indigenous community's perspective. DWF has had previous evaluation work done, and we will be building upon that information to ultimately gain leverage towards this project. We are also going to set up a data tabulation toolkit for staff members to learn how to clean and analyze data so it can be sustainable after this evaluation is complete. Next slide, please, Kelly. I'm going to go more into the unfamiliar parts of our data collection methods. So one of our techniques is going to be storytelling, and it's a message board that will have a data forum and allow participants in the program to provide personal testimonies of their experiences. It's a method that allows us to collect participants' experiences on their terms. And since this program teaches sensitive topics about colonization and residential schools, this particular method will offer a source of autonomy. Our next method is an art-based data collection approach, and participants can use photo voice, draw, paint, or even sing to express their experiences. This arts-based approach captures the abstract perspectives that one may not be able to put into words and is an engaging therapeutic approach. It will give stakeholders and our evaluation team more insight on if the programs are actually making an impact for Indigenous participants. And both of these approaches are going to be ongoing, as individuals can submit their art or their storytelling through DWF's website platform at any time. Next slide, please. We are also going to be having a survey that is considered an early adapter survey, also known as a pilot. And we will be seeking the survey to capture and measure the awareness, education, and action that the programs and activities have brought to non-Indigenous participants. And we want to take rural and urban populations into account. So we will sample individuals who have participated in the program from across the province. The advisory circle will help us make changes to the survey based on our results, and ultimately this survey will be implemented into the program's toolkits as an annual requirement for participants to complete. Next slide. Data triangulation for these methods is achieved by using new and old processes in place. We want to provide credibility through our qualitative art-based methods while also ensuring objectivity through our quantitative survey and document review. This integrated mixed methods approach will discover meta themes while allowing the data to generate further understanding. Next slide, or sorry, this slide still. For our data analysis, we will be using a gender-based analysis framework to ensure that there are no data gaps and multiple identities are captured. We will be using this analysis to make improvements and refine programs. For our actual data analysis approach, we will be completing a data party that will be done in part with the primary stakeholders, and their involvement will increase the understanding of the findings and creates a learning opportunity for stakeholders to gain experience with data analysis so they can use it in the future. And we will work with our stakeholders to review and shape our deliverables. Next slide.
To carry out evaluation, we have identified 3 key questions. Firstly, what is the reach and uptake for the DWF's program activities? Secondly, what are the effects of DWF's programs and activities on Indigenous people? And also, what are the effects of DWF's program and activities on non-Indigenous peoples? Next slide, please. Within our evaluation matrix, we have developed sub-questions and outlined appropriate indicators and data sources and data collection methods to measure these indicators. We want to note that the matrix outlines overall questions and indicators for all programs and activities at DWF. It's a starting point for developing and implementing a data system, but over time, these indicators will evolve such that the specific indicators for programs will be created. The first question we'll be looking at looks at reach and uptake of DWF programs and activities, specifically looking at the number of individuals, schools, organizations, and communities who are engaging in the programs, online presence and reach on social media platforms and websites, and DWF's reach for donors, sponsors, and community partners. And then I'm just going to focus in on the first sub-question. We are proposing using indicators of number of participants, as well as the number of new participants compared to existing participants to measure growth. We're also going to consider variance in the participation based on demographics, so age, gender, and ethnicity, as well as geography, rural, urban, provinces, and territories. And to complete this, we'll do a record document review and review previous evaluation results. The second question, so can you go to the next slide, please? So the second question looks at the effects of the DWF programs and activities on Indigenous peoples, where we're looking at if the programs and activities are culturally appropriate, if there have been changes in the experiences of the everyday lives of Indigenous people who've been supported by the program or the programs in their community or at their school, and also how effective these DWF programs are at building relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So focusing on the first sub-question, we want to specifically look at cultural relevance and consideration of Indigenous context. We'll be developing a measurement tool in collaboration with the Advisory Council that defines and measures cultural appropriateness / relevance, and then we'll review and assign a score to the program based on that. And then using the storytelling method, we'll supplement it by asking Indigenous participants to share their perspectives on the cultural appropriateness of the programs. We really want to center on the voices and experiences of Indigenous participants here. Next slide, please. So the last question we're looking at is looking at the effects of the programs and activities on non-Indigenous people to see if the programs are making impacts on changing knowledge and understanding among them. Specifically, we want to look at if the programs are enhancing understanding of the legacy of colonialism and residential school, as well as the interests, rights, and perspectives of Indigenous peoples among non-Indigenous people. Specifically, we also want to look at whether non-Indigenous people have taken action towards reconciliation by participating in these programs and activities. And we'll use self-reported indicators using a mixed method survey. Next slide, please. So briefly, we want to share the evaluation results and stories of Indigenous perspectives and experiences. So we propose sharing it through a data sharing party with the educators, advisory circle, at the council and staff. We'll also develop summary and 1-3-25 reports. That's going to be done in collaboration with this circle as well. And then also develop these informative and interactive materials that can be shared online as well as on social media. And we really want to be able to integrate the findings into future toolkit resources and use the findings to make improvements over time. Next slide, please.
In terms of the timeline, we've been allotted 35 to 45 consulting days, which we plan to occur over a series of 5 to 6 months. We'll begin with engaging our stakeholders, reviewing documents, and through this process, they will help us inform the creation of the data collection tools, as well as developing the dashboard for data collection. This will be followed by our data collection period through the methods that Haley mentioned earlier, including the storytelling message board, the outspace approach, and the survey. We'll follow this by our data analysis period, followed by a short knowledge translation phase with our stakeholders and any other parties that may be interested in our findings. And we'll spend a bit of time with our stakeholders in DWF on implementing the integrated data collection system, and we'll assure that we provide the training and support that they need to fully be confident in carrying out the data collection database post-evaluation.
Many challenges can come up. One of them, the first that we've identified is that we want to ensure we're not pan-indigenizing any perspectives. So in our data collection methods and using the GBA plus approach for analyzing data, we're ensuring, we hope to ensure that the data will be disaggregated and that will represent the unique perspectives of each community. And then also to additionally mitigate that, the Educator Advisor Circle will help mitigate any other challenges by consulting them and understanding what their opinions and what their voices are and how to solve these issues. Next slide.
The slide shows the CES competencies that we have identified, which are uses evaluation processes and practices that support reconciliation and build stronger relationships among Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And the second competency is uses communication strategies appropriate to the cultural, linguistic, social, and political context. Next slide, please. We would like to thank everyone for connecting with us virtually today. Footprint Consulting would also like to thank DWS Foundation, Canadian Evaluation Society, Simon Fraser University, and our coach, Beth Snow.
Hey, thank you very much, Footprint Consulting. I'm now going to turn it over to the judges, who will have a few minutes to ask some questions. If we'll have some time for a question from the sponsor, and if time, we'll see if there are some questions from the audience. So turning it over to you, judges.
Hi, I'm going to give this a shot again. Is everyone able to hear me?
Much better, Dom, much better.
Excellent, great. Well, good work, Footprint Consulting. That was a very interesting and well put together presentation. I'm sure you're all feeling a fair bit of relief right now. I have a number of questions that I was jotting down as you were speaking, and I'm having a hard time picking the one that I'd like to add or ask. So just kind of picking here, you mentioned a data party. And so I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about who would attend the party and how would you propose sharing or presenting what would be a lot of mixed methods data in a way that would generate the kind of discussion and reflection that could reflect all of the different data sources, but also the different perspectives around the table at the party.
Thank you so much for your question. I can begin to answer that. So with our data party, we are going to be working with stakeholders. So that means the Education Advisory Circle, the staff, and the youth ambassadors. And really, because those are such three different groups, we hope to gain different perspectives, being from Indigenous people, from youth, and from people who actually work in the program, so that they can tailor the results so that they'll be understandable to our funders as well as our community partners and donors. And what we're planning on doing is basically kind of having a main discussion together, but then also working back and forth on the analysis to make sure it makes sense with each of those stakeholders. So having that back and forth will hopefully shape the deliverables and for everyone involved. Thank you.
I guess I'll go with my question. So thank you for this very good presentation, hard work. We can see that. So I have a question around, it's about there is various pieces of your proposal, starting with something that I noticed in the logic model. We all know that we usually use quantitative indicators in the output column. But many of your proposed method are art-based approaches, more qualitative kind of method to capture the impact stories of a program. So, and given that the overall goal of projects is to get an integrated evaluation system moving forward in the future, so I'm a bit concerned about the level of effort in the future required to capture such qualitative data versus more easy quantitative data to capture. So I would like to hear you how this ongoing collection of qualitative information will happen in the future.
I can take that on. Thank you for your question. Yeah, in terms of qualitative data, we understand that it might be a bit more labor intensive and it might take a bit more skill to kind of draw apart the pieces in some of the findings, especially the more arts-based approaches. We're hoping to kind of develop a guideline or framework that the DWF stakeholders can kind of take and use post-evaluation and kind of use that to inform their analysis going forward after the evaluation. We understand that it might be more of a subjective piece and not as easy to kind of quantify it as the more quantitative methods like the survey. But we're hoping that with consultation of the advisory committees, we could kind of pick apart what is most important to them in terms of qualitative data and what they want to identify. And maybe that will help us also frame the kind of theming and coding of the more qualitative aspects. Yeah, I think that would be our strategy. And just ensuring that they're comfortable with dealing with qualitative data will be our priority upon like the knowledge translation data analysis segment of our project, and kind of addressing those gaps before implementing the dashboard and the sustainability of the data collection.
Thank you.
Good stuff. So congratulations to the team for making it this far. Your presentation was well laid out, well formatted. Expectations were high and you definitely met those expectations. And I think you probably know, if you attended the plenary yesterday, what question I'm going to ask based on a fondness for gender-based analysis plus. So we've heard it described as a tool, an analytical process, and a competency as well. And I encourage their team for the use of qualitative methods, particularly the storyboarding. What I'm wondering is if the team can comment specifically on, in my understanding as we move through the presentation, that these were geared for Indigenous participants, the storyboarding and making it accessible. And I saw it reflected, I think, in the evaluation matrix quite clearly. Has the team thought about the creation of unintentional barriers in terms of Indigenous participants that are engaging from either remote areas where data plan costs may be high, whether there's been any thinking about mitigating some of those and the demonstration of GBA as a competency?
Absolutely, that's a great question. And we did consider that because it is absolutely a reality that not everyone has access to, for example, participate in virtual speaking online or participating in storytelling through a message board. One of the first ways that we thought to mitigate this is that if we are able to reach the participant to figure out that they're not able to partake, first thing is to look at if they're part of a legacy school, see if there's any resources at the school that they could use to partake. And then also ensuring that in our data collection, that is one of the components that we're measuring of our participants, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, is their location, and considering with that context, is there a high rate of probably not participating because of their rural location? And so using those type of variables when we look at if we're missing data, why those data gaps exist, most often I think we'd first jump to maybe pandemic reasons at the moment, and then any other technology or, of course, traumatic and colonization barriers that would prevent them from participating.
Great. I have just one really fast follow-up question,
It
because
has to be
I think
fast.
it's super fast, I promise. I'm like, did the team discuss incentivization as part of the storyboarding and participating methods? Done, Catherine.
No, we haven't talked about incentivizing. The reason that we haven't is we know that can be really traumatic to talk about any stories, and especially if you're even non-Indigenous, you're learning and you're looking at your biases. So it could be, we definitely could look at incentivizing, but we really want the storyboard to be a place where it's from the heart, it's true experiences, and with our consistent feedback loop that we're going to establish by working closely with the advisory circle. If we're not getting any participation and it's really low, knowing that last time the survey was really low, the results were, I think, only 11%. Knowing that going forward, maybe that is something we implement for a survey or for the storyboard. But definitely with the storyboard, we saw that it's a continuous ability just to add, and it's would be able to get everyone's voice out. And I think that hopefully would be the reward in itself, is hearing your voice and seeing it reflected in the impact of the program.
Okay. Well, we're quickly running out of time, but we still would like to have one question from our longtime sponsors, Ference. I'm going to invite Cassandra Parsons up to ask one very quick question. Cassandra, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. Thank you so much for having us on and to ask a question on behalf of Ference and Company today. Congrats everyone on finishing. I know it's a big accomplishment. It was a great presentation. I really wanted to ask, you have lots of information and an ambitious proposal. You have 2 different very big qualitative projects. You're hoping to train the staff in various ways on data collection and analyzing and all of that. And I'm curious if you've thought much about burnout of either the stakeholders, part of the organization, or even the participants, given the potentially sensitive information that you'll be gathering and the vast amount of big data collection projects that you've recommended here.
I think burnout is a very a real threat, and absolutely, so thank you for your question. For the different methods, we are aware that there's quite a few. The emphasis on why we added a few is to start with that data triangulation to really emphasize the quantitative and the qualitative. I think with burnout, it'd be a great place to start with our education advisory circle to understand what is the level of participation they normally have on a yearly basis with their schools, with their teachers, and see what level that's what we'd be aiming for yearly, because we really want this to be a continuous process. For things like the storyboard, that is a submission that doesn't take a lot of effort on participants once their story's in, and it looks like it could be a great success considering DWF already has numerous infrastructures in place to submit a video, so they currently have the same submission in place, so that there's things that hopefully the participants of the program are already used to contributing, and we can build on that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yay, well, thank you, Footprint Consulting.